Today at the senior staff meeting, I want to talk about the pathway to success. In April and July, when I met with the senior team of general managers and executive managers, we explored two themes, very related themes. One, failure, and the other, success. I wanted to explore success in the wider context of this leadership day. And although failure is important, and to some extent it lies behind much of the conversation that we may have, what really is our focus is that way of success. It's worth considering where success might be found, how we might understand it and explore it. We could do it in terms of our personal lives, personal success. And I suppose that's much broader than work. Those things in life that might make us feel that we are successful. We could do it certainly, and I hope we will. That's a priority for me, to do it in terms of our business. It's a career question, but it's more than that. It's a question about an organisation, about how we feel about what we're doing. And also we could talk about it in relation to Christian success. Now, we struggle with those two words and those two concepts, I'll be the first to admit, of Christian and success, of holding them together. But we shouldn't avoid that. We shouldn't hesitate to talk about the two, as long as they're strongly related to values and character. We don't often find the word success in the Old Testament or the New Testament unless we really explore outcomes and goals. Those things that if you like, are the deliverables, the things that are flowing from what we do. I think we move into the area of accomplishments when we start talking in this way, and behaviours that are honourable in the sight of God. Parts of the Old Testament, in fact, have been used by some people to put up a false model of success, almost suggesting that following God is going to bring success and that we have success as a right. Now, I think all those things are very questionable. Very often people forget that many of the prophets experienced failure. In fact, it was explicitly often built into their mission. In the New Testament, we hold together a careful balance between the relationship in the ministry of Jesus, of his sufferings, and the resurrection. Those two things have to be seen together. In my understanding of how we deal with the subject, that's important. I find myself drawn to John's Gospel because in John's Gospel, the cross is seen to be the place where Jesus Christ is glorified. Any organisation that's serious about growth needs to address the important matter of the pathway to success. Success is often defined in terms of favourable results, the things that are the deliverables in terms of the work that I and you do. It can, of course, be unhelpfully thought of in terms of gaining wealth, position, and competitive advantage. I hope all of us would be sufficiently informed about the Christian faith to recognise that it's possible to be wealthy and unsuccessful, and also poor and successful. So when you recognise those two things and you put them there, you hold them because they're a matter of integrity for us. I draw your attention to the Sermon on the Mount, to the teaching of Jesus. First of all, in the Sermon on the Mount, and so often in the passages there, we have passages that talk about God's pattern for our lives. When we come to the end chapter, the 7th chapter of the Sermon of the Mount, Matthew 5 through to 7, when we come to the end of the 7th chapter, we have some words about, justification of our lives, and then we have the parable of the wise and foolish builders. Now, I want to say about this parable before I read it, that it disturbs me that it's often viewed as a kind of child's parable. Well, first of all, the Sermon on the Mount wasn't written for children. And not only was it not written for children, this has some of the most adult implications of any of the stories that Jesus ever told. So we read in Matthew 7:24 through to 27. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Now, I'm not going to open that up in a biblical expository way. I leave that to you. I hope you'll turn to your Bibles and read it when you have the time again. But the tough message is one that we cannot avoid, that there are not numerous ways to build, there are essentially two. One that is upon that which is solid, and one which is that which crashes. I think that truth can be perceived as exclusive and therefore can be challenging to handle. However, when we look beyond that aspect and ask, are we building for success? I think it's an interesting question. In May's edition of the Harvard Business Review, there was an article on the theme of failure and success and how one turns an experience of failure into success. It's well worth reading. It declared, one of the most important and most deeply entrenched reasons why companies struggle to grow is their fear of failure. Now, this suggestion from the article, which indeed one I believe is important, is that we should learn from every failure and we should transform it, turn it into a success. Failure is less painful when we learn the lessons that are to be gleaned from it. As a Christian leader, I have to accept at the same time that there are some models of success which are just unhealthy. Acknowledging the context of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, prior to the Second World War and then during the Second World War, I understand what it means when he said the figure of the crucified invalidates all thought which takes success as the standard. Success is not our standard, but a pathway which brings honour to God. There are many poor models of success. You know, I think one of the most fascinating and yet terrible examples of this comes from Downton Abbey. Maggie Smith, who for me is one of my favourite actresses, who I think towards the end of the 20th and the early days of the 21st century, with that wonderful Lady in the Van performance, she's a magnificent actress, and she plays this role as the Dowager Countess of Grantham. And there is a scene in the third series where she overlooks a table being set for a special dinner. And the table has not only a beautiful linen, it has the best china, fantastic crystal glass, silverware from top to bottom, beautiful candelabras all set. And she stands back with that inimitable character that she is. And she says, there is nothing succeeds like excess. And of course, that's a good example of what success is not. It's hard to believe, really, it's 26 years since Jim Collins and Jerry Porras wrote Built to Last, which I'm sure many of you will have read. The book explores what at the time they considered to be the habits of extraordinarily visionary companies. They listed 18 different companies from different walks of life and defined a visionary company in a particular way. They said it was a premier leader within the particular industry in which it's working, a company that's made an impact on the world, a company that's made multiple generations of good appointments of leaders, its CEO. All those things were there, and especially having multiple cycles of successful service. Subsequently, the book was hugely criticised, and particularly after the global financial crisis. Collins, of course, was right to defend the case by saying he acknowledged the weaknesses in the book, but did not say these are the things that will bring success. The book never promised that, he said, but it did describe companies that had experienced success. And one great asset of that publication is that many of our own sectors gleaned things from it, and to some extent it kick-started a whole generation of not-for-profit organisations thinking more deeply about their business model. The reason I mention this book is because the authors of the work concluded that the extraordinary success in companies, that the ones they refer to, is not due chiefly to charismatic leadership, though that is important, or that they all found some great idea that nobody else ever had. Instead, they commended the fact that these highly successful companies had some characteristics that united them in their success. Firstly, their focus had been on a set of core values which never changed. Secondly, each company always had a purpose that was higher than just making a profit. Making a difference was also important, as well as making a profit. And thirdly, there was a relentless drive to change and improve everything in the company except the core values, which for most have been in place since the early days of the company's existence. I don't find it hard to share those thoughts with you and suggest it's the kind of pattern that Jesus Christ left with us. When we go back to the Sermon on the Mount, to the 6th chapter, we find there Jesus talking about seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I think Jesus is really there saying, let's make sure that those things that are the basis, the values, are in the right place, and that other things will be added. Other things can grow from that truth. I recall the preacher's story. I've told it many times from pulpits. And it's a letter sent from college to parents from their daughter. They received this letter. First side of the letter said, just thought I'd drop you a note to clue you in on my plans. I've fallen in love with a guy called Jim. He quit high school after grade 11 to get married. About a year ago, he got a divorce. We've been going steady for 2 months and plan to get married in the autumn. Until then, I've decided to move into his apartment. I think I might be pregnant. At any rate, I dropped out of college last week, although I'd like to finish college sometime in the future. At the bottom of the letter, it said PTO. Parents turned it over and said, Mum and Dad, I just want you to know that everything I've written so far in this letter is false. None of it's true. Mum and Dad, it is true that I got C in French, I flunked my maths, and it's true that I'm going to need a lot more money to be able to pay my tuition payments. Now, failure and success are very interesting themes, and failure can sound like success in some contexts. It depends on the perspective. The measuring device we use to evaluate our success or failure is as important as everything else, because of a large extent it determines the success or failure. Success can distort our perspective. Any of us who've had the privilege of being parents won't need too much explanation of the story of Charles Francis Adams, a 19th century political figure and diplomat. He kept an assiduous diary, which really was very significant. And one day he entered into that diary, went fishing with my son today, a day wasted. Brooks Adams, his son, also kept a diary and made this entry, went fishing with my father, the most wonderful day of my life. Now, the father thought it was a waste of time. The son saw it as an investment of time. The only way to tell the difference between wasting and investing is to know what the ultimate purpose in life is and judge accordingly. Well over 100 years ago, Ralph Waldo Emerson noted 3 qualities that he said were the true marks of success. Firstly, he said the ability to discern and appreciate beauty, the ability to see the best in others, and a commitment to leaving the world a better place. This is the kind of perspective, I think, which makes us meaningfully explore success as an organisation. It's also important to recognise that these truths are acknowledged by many outside of the Christian community. The Harvard Medical School psychologist Stephen Berglass wrote a book called The Success Syndrome. He found that individuals who in his mind suffered success have arrogance and a sense of aloneness, that wrong take on success. And when he was asked to prescribe a cure for the painful aspects of what he described as the success syndrome, he said, what's missing in these people's life is a deep commitment or a religious activity that goes far beyond writing a check for a charity. I think that's very interesting. In other words, what he's suggesting is success is a much broader and grander theme than just pulling in a result at one point in time. When I was sharing this with my top team on the theme of success, I used the example of Clive Woodward. Now, Clive Woodward in 2000 took responsibility for the English rugby team. At that point in time, you need to know that they invariably lost matches after winning at half-time. It was a regular pattern. England would go in, it'd be something like 16-9, it comes out at the end 34-25 or something like that. The game switched around. When he took on the role, he recognised this, he knew that was an issue that he had to respond to. And the way he did it, he said all the team have to wear new shirts when they go out for the second half. They had to wear new shirts and new kit. Now, that may seem a very small thing, but it was important. It was important, included the Underwood brothers and one Johnny Wilkinson, which of course many in Australia will remember in the succeeding years. The change came about because there was an attitudinal change. There was something that was important to them. Of course, there are pitfalls to success, and which can not only distort our perspective, but also lead to false pride and ingratitude. Success within an organisation needs to be shared across the whole. Look, I've no interest in just area successes. We need a success together. And leaders, however grand they may be, whatever their careers have said to them, the greatest thrill that I get as the head of the organisation is to see when that success is shared across the whole, when it is making a difference that impacts upon the whole. I think that's so critically important. If it doesn't happen that way, we lose our way. I offer to my senior team and commend to you half a dozen pointers to success as I understand it. To be successful, we primarily manage processes rather than people, but we engage in those processes because the way that views people for us is critical to our success. So process is the way that we manage it, but we manage it because we manage people who are critical to that success. Secondly, I think we value incremental gains. Of course we are focused on the large picture, but incrementally that's important in our success, to see this thing developing and growing. So we value incremental gains even though we're playing for the end game. We discover what it means to be a team, not only our particular area. It's possible, to build an organisation. People say, I really like working at Wesley Mission because our team is great. Well, if it's your team that's great and not the larger team, then I really am missing something very critical in terms of passing on this message that we really are a team together. Now, we bring different contributions. We are a community that contributes as a whole as well as individuals. A conscious recognition of the whole. We communicate freely up and down. The one thing that is a feature of being a CEO or leader at a high level of any organisation is that very often you don't get to know everything that you should know. Things happen, you know nothing about them. This leads me to conclude that we must continually work on our communication processes to ensure that they're lubricated by trust and a belief in a common vision. We establish a winning culture and maintain our values in the process. Of course, if we're going to be successful, we need a winning culture. We need something that says to ourselves, this is what we're about and this is how we can achieve it and this is how we're going to achieve it. But we don't lose the values in the process. And we see change as an opportunity, not a threat. And not just the change that we've been party to initiating. It's so easy for people to say, well, I believe in change and they're the changes we're doing. But when other people bring the changes, we're not sure we like that. The truth is change needs to be something that we readily embrace. Sometimes people who join us from the commercial world feel they bring all the magic there. Not so at all. The truth is that I'm glad that everybody adds to what we are and what we do. However, I'm certain that we have a greater added value than just the approaches of the business world around us. In the not-for-profit world, we are not merely doing what everybody else does in a different way. We actually bring a contribution to the table. We bring a contribution that we have to explore, and we have to say to ourselves, what is the value add of that which we bring? We've set ourselves a way of growth, a 5-year strategic plan, which is a growth of 50%, and recognising that first year has been very much about laying down the platforms and building it. We now need to be moving into growth to growth in so many of our areas. And I'm absolutely sure in my own mind that it's possible to maintain a Christian grasp and on this theme of success, and to build on it and let it be the starting point, let it be the building block on which we establish our work. One of the things I hope we'll explore together is what it means to visualize what success might look like. Each person has a part to play in this. Each area has a part to particularly explore what that looks like, and not deny the significance of measuring success in the realms of integrity and concern for one another. I once read some very simple and yet striking words. You can use most of any measure when you're speaking of success. You can measure it in a fancy home, expensive car or dress. But the measure of your real success is one you cannot spend. It's the way your son describes you when he's talking to a friend. It's not merely a pious statement, but the recognition that success is a whole of life experience and how we are measured against ourselves. In 1980, after 3 years of ministry formation at Bristol, in Avon in the west of England, I was appointed to be the second minister at the Plymouth Central Hall. Now this was another 120 miles south in Devon, very much in the heart of the West Country. And there's a story from that appointment that I want to share with you, and its relationship to the pathway to success. I was appointed particularly because a very significant ministry was coming to a close. Reg had exercised a magnificent pulpit ministry in the very largest churches in Britain. He had a public profile, a media presence. He was in every sense successful. And his ministry was coming to an end. And all the people were saying the usual kind of things that they do when leadership comes to an end. We'll never find anybody like you. Well, of course, the truth is they never find anybody like you, but they find somebody else that can fit that particular role. But Reg's ministry was coming to an end, and my job was to work with him and enable that to happen very smoothly. I lived on the Central Hall premises, which had an apartment for the second minister, and also on those premises there was an apartment for our caretaker George. It wasn't very long before I discovered the unique relationship between these two gentlemen, Reg and George. They'd been colleagues together at Bible school in the mid-1930s. But George was a little older than Reg, and because of the age difference of about 2 years, on leaving college, one went off as a young man to train for ministry at Reg, whereas George was called up and went to serve in the Second World War. Now, that war lasted for far longer than people imagine, for the best part of 6 years. When he returned from the end of his military service, he was too old to enter the ministry. In those days, you got to the age of 25 and you were ancient. Today, it's a flip side to that, of course. But he wasn't able to do that. And through those circumstances, it was very difficult. But George eventually, when Reg had taken up the responsibility in Plymouth, having moved from Bradford, he applied to be the caretaker. And so here you have George. George is not a minister, but a very fine local preacher, a very creditable one. Life separated these two men until George responded to be the caretaker and Reg was the superintendent. Now, which of these men was successful? You could make a decision based upon public notoriety, but the world's way of measuring success might well lead you down that road, but it'd be a mistake, for both men were successful in widely differing ways. In these addresses, I like to relate the theme that we're taking together to personal leadership, because I think that's so important, and so particular today, the relationship between leadership and the pathway to success. For if we're going to discover what success is, it will be because you in your areas, with your people, with your operations, are passing along a message of what it means to be a successful organisation that will lead to growth and development into the future. And I really don't want to hear people say, oh, we shouldn't talk like that as Christians. We should. What we should talk about is the theme, but do it in a particular way, through the prism of those values that make us who we are. I recognise, as I observe the patterns of great leaders, that very often people are inevitably thrust into a public profile position. But when you dig deeply and you start studying leaders, and I've tried to do that, when you study some of these characters and people, the most successful of Christian leaders is often somebody that is concerned about the success of others. So this issue of success is not something that we observe and look at, if you like, in an objective way, but something that we experience within ourselves and we encourage in others. And our success is then, to some extent, measured by the success of those we work alongside. That resonates, I'm sure, with the teaching of Jesus, who made it clear, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. Now, I don't think that's about denigrating self, but it's about recognising the way to that success. Another story. Marion Hill was born in a fairy tale royal palace in Hungary. We say sometimes, don't we, that people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Well, Marion was born with a gold spoon in her mouth. The first spoon she ever took food from would literally be gold. She was sent to school in Vienna, and there she became an actress. And she fell in love with a medical student named Otto. She fell in love with this student, and Otto and Marion married and went to live in Hollywood, California. They set up home there, and Otto began to dabble in the movies. He became so interested in the film industry, he gave up his medical practice and took on film as a complete career. He became the internationally recognised film director Otto Preminger. Marion's beauty, wit and irresistible charm and sophistication made her everything she desired. In Europe, New York and Hollywood, she became a famous international hostess. But she couldn't handle the fast lane. She slipped into alcohol, drugs and endless affairs. She divorced Otto and 3 times tried to take her own life, before finally moving back to Vienna. There she met another doctor, Dr. Albert Schweitzer. She knew her life was in a mess, and every week for almost 6 months, she went for counsel to Dr. Schweitzer and talked about her own particular life. She met with him and he helped her on that journey. When the time came for the great medical doctor missionary to return to his modest hospital in the heart of Africa, she chose to go with him. She spent the rest of her life as a hospital servant. When she wrote her autobiography, she chose as its title, All I Want Is Everything. Wherever did she get that title from? When she died, Time magazine quoted from her autobiography. She wrote, Albert Schweitzer says there are 2 kinds of people. There are the helpers and the non-helpers. I thank God he allowed me to become a helper. And in helping, I found everything. I think it takes a lifetime to learn that lesson. It could be argued that the happiest and most successful of people and leaders are those who've discovered the irresistible truth that's found here. Later in the morning, we're going to be looking at this theme of success and how it's worked out in the specific circumstances of our lives, our area, and as an organisation. And I hope we won't be unduly modest or falsely modest. We need to grasp what success means and then to build on it in a way that is really genuine. We need leaders who will bring us success. And yet those who understand this grow out of a clear Christian perception of success. Well, for me, I'm reminded that this success is not something that we ourselves are able to achieve on our own. I've often preached on and take that lovely thought from the Old Testament that is profoundly true from the book of Zechariah. not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. So if there is going to be success, it will come about because genuinely we have grasped the source of our success. Have a wonderful day, and let's really get hold of this theme of success and leave this place with a real sense of confidence and enthusiasm for the future.